Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Los Angeles artist Sandow Birk. He is a graduate of the Otis Art Institute of Parsons School of Design. Frequently developed as expansive multimedia projects, his works have dealt with contemporary life in its entirety. With an emphasis on social issues, frequent themes of his past work have included inner-city violence, graffiti, political issues, travel, war, and prisons, as well as surfing and skateboarding. He was the recipient of an NEA International Travel Grant to Mexico City in 1995 to study mural painting, then a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1996, and a Fulbright Fellowship for painting to Rio de Janeiro in 1997. In 1999, he was awarded a Getty Fellowship for painting, followed by a City of Los Angeles Fellowship in 2001. 2 years ago, he was an artist in residence at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., and at the Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris last year. Birk visited the U of O campus on October the 1st as a guest of the Department of Romance Languages. He presented Dante's Inferno Gets Animated, a talk about and a screening of his film, Dante's Inferno. Sandow, welcome to UO Today.
Thank you.
We're really pleased that you could take the time to come and talk to us.
Me too.
The film that we're talking about and that you presented here on campus has had a really positive and broad spectrum critical reaction. So the San Francisco Chronicle described it as God's face in a Groucho mask, a triumphant cathedral that will bring new readers to Dante. Could you give us a short description of the film so that viewers will know what we're talking about?
Of the film or of the poem itself?
Start with the poem itself, perhaps, and then we'll move on to the film.
Well, Dante's Inferno is a poem, 700-year-old poem in Italian that tells the story of Dante, who wakes up one morning lost in a forest, and he's not sure how he got there, and he starts wandering around trying to find his way out, and a guy comes along, and it turns out it's the ghost of the poet Virgil, who says that he will lead him out of the forest, but first he has to lead him on a tour of hell. And he follows Virgil on a tour of hell and meets all the people and visits all the levels of hell, and then finally they emerge on the other side.
That's a really good synopsis, actually. Yeah. Congratulations.
For a long poem, yeah.
Yeah, that's really well done. You said, of course, in your remarks and on the website for the film, it talks about Dante's Inferno as well as the Purgatorio and the Paradiso as cornerstones of Western civilization, and I think that's probably a pretty widely accepted evaluation of them.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to take on a big masterwork like that?
It's sort of by accident. As an artist, the projects I do usually start by looking at artworks from the past and sort of thinking about how they can be reimagined to have something to say about life in our world today. I frequently look to artworks that I studied in college or seen in museums in my travels or something as a starting point. And really simply, I started this project by buying a $4 copy of the Divine Comedy in a used bookstore by my house, just because I like the pictures. It had a series of illustrations by Gustave Doré, who's a French illustrator from the late 1800s, which are fantastic, and they're also the most famous of the illustrations of Dante, the most widely reproduced in things. But I found this book and started reading it and looking at the pictures, and over the course of maybe a year, it sort of dawned on me that this could be a starting place to do a new project about life in America today.
I think we'll take the time to insert the trailer for the movie here so that people can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, let's do that
it's
now.
Hard to describe.
All right.
No.
I have been sent to guide you on a long journey through the deep soil of horror and torment, where the dead beg to die once more.
It's called punishment, Mr. Alighieri. Our souls are imprisoned in these trees.
Run! Run for your life! About halfway through the course of my pathetic life, I woke up and found myself in a stupor in some dark, unfamiliar place. I'm not sure how I ended up there. I guess I had taken a few wrong turns.
Your Honor, no!
Guinevere bethought herself that she would like to go
And I was tired. I must have passed out. I'd become somewhat accustomed to waking up in strange places.
Dos Redonia.
No living souls allowed here, and you're not crossing the river on this ferry.
I felt completely lost and was ready to give up.
This way, Dante.
The third day, I'm a congressman.
I am genius of Carpathians.
Security breach.
Baby, we was just talking about how,
I'm not Mrs. Butterworth. God damn it, I'm Senator Strom Thurmond.
Oh, no, no way, never, ever gonna.
Next stop, Lake Cocytus, next stop, end of the line.
I was totally expecting to see demons and bondage stuff.
This is hell, Dante, not your personal fantasy.
Well, that will have given people a little bit of a taste of what the movie's actually like.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to what you were saying before we showed the trailer. You were initially attracted to it, and it makes sense given that you are first and foremost an artist, by the illustrations by Gustave Doré that are justifiably quite famous. But I gather from what you explained in your presentation that you also, bit by bit, got sucked into the text.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. I was really drawn in by the images at first, but then I just started picking away and reading little bits of it, and then reading more, and then eventually reading about the poem, analysis of it, and sort of studies of it. And it's really remarkable, fascinating poem. The more that you get into it, and yeah, it really drew me in. Like they say, like you said earlier, it is considered to be one of the cornerstones of Western literature, and I've heard it even referred to as like the second most important book in the West outside of the Bible, which is maybe a book from the East, but it's a fascinating, amazing sort of work. The way that Dante wrote this incredibly long poem, and he encompasses inside the poem sort of all the known theological concepts of his day, and then all this vast knowledge of astronomy, of like medicine, how the human body works, of ancient Greek myths and things are all thrown in. Then he invents this whole sort of physical description of a place that is hell, and even to how big it is, and he's with all these levels of things happening, and then on top of that, it all rhymes and becomes a poem. It's just really like 18 levels of remarkability in one work.
It makes it that much more daunting to compress it and simplify it into something that you can do in 77 minutes, I would think. You did a lot of simplifying.
Well, yes.
Although, as I know firsthand, it retains an incredible complexity, both visually and in its content. I wanted to ask you why you chose to set the story in L.A.
Well, we actually didn't set it in L.A. It's meant to be in an unnamed American city. And the film grew out of a larger project in which was an art exhibition that became 3 books, in which it was the Inferno and Purgatory and Paradise. Inferno is actually only the beginning part of one long poem, which is the Divine Comedy. It's only at sort of in our days that it's been broken into 3 bits. Well, not our days, but I don't think it was his original intention. So when you're discussing the Inferno, you're only discussing 1/3 of the work. So in the larger project I did, Dante travels from hell to purgatory and into heaven, and it's all set in contemporary American cities.
I suppose I assumed it was L.A. because that is where you yourself are based a lot of the time, and also because you do a great job of reproducing a kind of a place with lots of freeways and car culture and parking lot structures and under overpasses. So maybe it's redolent of LA without actually making
Palm
a specific
trees.
palm trees.
Yeah.
Palm trees, yeah.
Well, it's my town, so it sneaks in there. But for example, in Purgatory, much of the plot is him climbing the mountain of Purgatory. So many of the images I used were San Francisco, because of the famous hilly streets that it has. It made like a great background for that. But and there's many scenes set in New York, and then when he gets to heaven, there's scenes set in Tijuana and Mexico City and sort of these unexpected places that you would not imagine as being heavenly.
That leads me to back up just a minute, because this particular film of the Inferno is only a piece of the larger project that you've undertaken by engaging with the Divine Comedy, right? Can you talk about some of the other aspects, your translation, the other artwork?
It was such a long process, it's sort of hard to discuss briefly. But like I said, it sort of began accidentally with my stumbling on a book, and then I pitched it to my galleries as an art exhibition, which was intended to be a series of paintings of the Inferno, and then it trickled out. A printing press in San Francisco got word of the project, and they offered to do a print version of all the images, and that led to us thinking that it didn't make any sense to have the images without the text, which led to us trying to get the text, which led to us eventually adapting the text ourselves, which led to a book, which led to a film. So sort of a long process. It took about 4 or 5 years.
I was just going to ask how long that took. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you adapted Dante's notion of the 9 circles of hell to contemporary America? The contemporary world and America, as opposed to Western Europe?
Well, the project was meant to be reverential to Dante's original poem, but also at the same time talk about life in our worlds today. So what we did was take the divisions of hell that Dante came up with, and his sort of moral decisions on what sins are worse than others, and what punishments are deserved and things. And then we tried to think of contemporary parallels with people in our times, which would either reflect our political views, but also make Dante's concepts more easily graspable by normal people like us. So when he talks about adulterers and you put in like a politician that had an affair or something, it becomes more easily understandable in our own terms.
There's a lot of very contemporary references, so one understands this best if you've stayed on top of sort of popular culture and politics in the last 10 years, and also music and counterculture and youth culture.
Yeah.
Do you think it will endure despite the very specific cultural reference?
Well, we planned for that. We knew that using very contemporary sort of pop people would have a short shelf life, but we did plan for that, but not so much connivingly. It was sort of built in, because what we did was follow Dante's lead, and in Dante's original poem, it's imagined that he's going on a tour of hell, and so naturally the only people that he could meet in hell would be people that are dead. And so we took that as our same sort of starting point. So there's not people like Paris Hilton or something, because they're not dead yet. If you went to hell today, you couldn't meet them there. So it's only Americans or international figures that are now dead.
With one notable exception, but we don't want to reveal that joke. We don't want it to be a spoiler.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. When I watched this in a big hall full of a lot of students, as well as community members and a lot of professors, I was struck by the laughter. Humor and irony and sarcasm and just plain rudeness are a big part of this film. Is that also to be true to the original?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you want to talk about how that works in Dante's version?
Well, Dante's poem, I mean, it's hell, so there's a lot of swearing, and there's a lot of flipping people off and farting and defecating and torturous things, sex and violence. So those were all in there, but I think our film is much funnier than Dante's. He's a bit serious. I don't think he would have been that fun of a person to hang out with.
What it does do, though, is give students a way of realizing how fresh the material would have been to Dante's audience. So my guess is if his contemporary readers would have been a little bit scandalized and a little bit titillated and a little bit shocked and amused as they were reading it. So you've found a way to make that reader's role come alive again with contemporary references. Do you listen for laughter when you're in a hall where the film is showing?
Well, it's rewarding. It's it was extremely difficult to make this film. Basically, 4 of us worked on it for about a year and a half, and then we filmed this whole complex film in 2 weeks with a team of about 50 people. And for about 2 years, that's pretty much all we did, the 4 of us, was working on it and preparing for it and working on the script and making the sets and editing and everything. And then when we finally screened it for the first time, we were all sitting there, and when the first time people started laughing, I remember my friend Paul Zalumi turned to me and he said, "I wrote that joke 2 years ago, and finally we're getting to hear somebody laugh at it." So I'm not a movie maker, but it's a very strange process to how long it takes to make a film.
One of the striking elements of this visually is that you used paper puppets.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very clear that there are puppets because we can see the sticks and the strings
Mm-hmm.
and the articulation of the limbs. Why puppets?
That's what I ask. It doesn't seem to be a very smart idea. But the short answer is because we didn't have any money. But the slightly longer answer is that one of the team was Paul Zaloom, who is a puppeteer by profession. He's sort of a pretty well-known performance artist in LA. He does very adult, political, funny puppet shows all around the country. He's most known because he used to have a television show called Beekman's World, in which he did science experiments for children and things. But he's a really funny guy, and he sort of insisted that we do it with puppets. And then since he's a puppeteer, and he sort of swayed us with this long discussion about the history of puppetry, and that these sort of tradition of paper puppet plays comes out of the 1700s and the 1800s, which was the time period that Doré was doing his illustrations. So it all seemed to sort of fit together conceptually.
You do make a point, though, of setting up the action as a really theatrical
Mm-hmm.
production, and you really play with the performance part of it. So when the film opens, we see an audience settling into their seats, and then there's a stage with a proscenium and an orchestra. So was that why did you set it up as something that we would obviously watch as a performance?
Well, it's drawn from the tradition of this kind of puppetry, which is called toy theater, and this was a kind of puppetry where in the 1700s in Europe, kids would go to the newsstand and buy that week's play. They'd buy it for 2 cents or something, and it would be like a punch-out thing that would come with a little stage and the little figures and then the script to do like a Shakespearean play or something. And at the time, this was like television for children in those days. And so, since when we decided to do that style of puppetry, we wanted to do it in that way as a theatrical performance. And then once the film gets going, the camera moves in and it becomes more like a movie.
But there are some self-aware references in the dialogue that show that the voices know that they're performing, and so it's a very knowing, kind of a sly performance. Turning to other things that you're doing, because although this consumed 4 or 5 years of your life, you have a lot of other artistic projects going. Could you talk a little bit about In Smog and Thunder and Prisonation?
Yes, both of those came prior to the Dante project, but I do have this sort of tendency to sort of get an idea, very small idea, and it sort of just grows beyond my control almost to become these enormous projects. In Smog and Thunder, was a series of paintings and artworks about a fictional war between San Francisco and Los Angeles that became several exhibitions and a museum show and then a book, and also a short film called In Smog and Thunder, and it's a fake documentary about the war based on Ken Burns' Civil War television show. It's quite funny as well, and that's available on Netflix and things. Following that, I did a whole series of paintings. It was called Prisonation, and it was a series in which I traveled around California and visited every one of the 33 state prisons and painted pictures of them. And then did the Dante project, and more recently I've done a whole series of 15 enormous prints about the war in Iraq, sort of telling the story of the war from beginning to its plausible end at some point.
You've projected it forward to a plausible end?
It ends with troops returning home and wounded veterans and things. It doesn't really decide what the political outcome is, but it has a aftermath, sort of.
And to go back to Prisonation for a minute, were you interested in the prisons as buildings, or the outside of them, the inside of them, the population?
They were all sort of these really beautiful landscape paintings of the prisons, and the project, again, grew out of art history. I was interested in, I had been looking at the paintings of the West by the famous landscape painters who had come out to Yellowstone and Yosemite and the Grand Canyon and you know, all over the West, and painted these amazing paintings, you know, Beardstadt and Thomas Moran and all these artists. And I was sort of struck at, I was looking at those and reading about them, and I was struck at sort of the optimism that they had in the early 1800s, when the East saw the American West as the Garden of Eden, and where you can go pick oranges off the trees and it's always sunny, and you can dig gold out of the ground, and then at the same time I was sort of reading about them, I heard it accidentally on the radio mentioned that California has a larger percentage of its population in prison of anywhere else on Earth, and it was just sort of a remarkable sentence. And I sort of thought that, wow, I live in the most incarcerated population and I've never even thought about prisons, so maybe I should go look at them. And so I drove out to where the prisons are and saw them, and ironically and sadly, they're often actually in the settings that these famous old paintings were painted in. So I did these landscape paintings contradicting sort of the hope and optimism of the previous century, and to show what California has become.
Did you offer any of those paintings to the wardens, the administrations of those institutions?
I didn't offer them, no. I did give some talks, and people that worked in prisons came up to me afterwards and said that they worked in prisons, and there is a book out about it. It's called Prisonation, and has all the paintings in it, and people have seen it.
You have not shied away from the big stuff. You've taken on a lot of really controversial topics, a lot of engagement with social ills. A project you're working on now, I think it fits into that realm very well. You're working on a series of illustrations of the Quran, correct? Or
yes.
Perhaps not illustrations.
Yeah,
what
I don't
would you
call them illustrations.
What would you
call them illuminations. It's sort of take from the tradition of illuminated manuscripts. And yes, I'm creating an entirely handmade, hand-transcribed, illuminated manuscript of the Quran in the tradition of how they were made 1,000 years ago.
What is the ultimate goal with that project? Is it to encompass the whole body of that very important work? Is it to visualize it as opposed to having it in the textual realm?
It's very similar to the Dante project. What I'm doing is reading the Quran and sort of pondering it and taking it at face value and sort of thinking, if this is a message from God to human beings, and I'm a human being, how would this message reflect my life in a day-to-day basis? Like I'm going to the supermarket right now, and how does this sort of message affect my life? And so the scenes I'm using are scenes of people doing everyday things. But I think the larger purpose is first it's sort of personal curiosity and wanting to learn more about the Quran, and then it's sort of simply, it's remarkable that Americans know so little about the Quran, and how, seeing the state of politics and wars going on in the world today, I think it could be argued that it might be the most important book in the world. And here we've had going on a decade of struggle against Islamic countries. It seems we should know a little bit more about it.
What's the medium and the format for those illuminations?
They're done as full-size pages for a feature book that it will become, and the medium is the traditional techniques of ink, lettering, and gouache painting and watercolor painting on paper.
Are you putting up with, are you having to address people's maybe hesitations about you taking on such a sacred text in that way?
Well, it's so far, I'm about a third of the way through the project, and it's resulted in 2 exhibitions which are up right now in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. And so it's sort of just debuted, but the response has been great attention, but surprisingly positive. The galleries have said that tons of Islamic people are coming in to see the shows, that they're getting a lot of foot traffic from people that don't necessarily come to art galleries in general. It's gotten a lot of press, and it's surprisingly been positive, which is nice.
One of the things that really strikes me, and we'll close on this, is there's a lovely irony in this. I heard you describe your own history as an undergraduate. You weren't exactly thrilled with school,
right?
But now you are engaging with these masterworks.
Yeah, I've sort of become a self-taught sort of scholar, I guess, sort of by accident. I think at one point, towards the end of this 5 years working on Dante, I sort of dawned on me that I could have got a PhD in Dante by how many years I had spent studying him, even though it was all sort of my own meandering sort of way of studying, but it has been a big investment.
It's setting a great example. We're going to have to end there. Sandow, thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with artist Sandow Birk. He visited the U of O on October 1st to present his film, Dante's Inferno. Thank you for watching.